Chapter 21 of The Girl Next Door by Augusta Huiell Seaman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jennifer Dahlman. 6 months later. Janet, dear, I know you think I'm a wretch for not having written in so long, but honestly things have been happening so fast that I don't have time to sit down and write you about one event before a brand new one has taken place. I've missed you horribly ever since you went back to Northam. It was a shame that you had to leave just after the grand clear-up of our mystery, for you have been missing some of the most wonderful parts, all the lovely things that have happened since. I think I've already written to you about some of the changes that have taken place in Benedict's Folly. It's the most remarkable thing the way Aunt Minerva has taken that place, Miss Benedict and all, completely under her wing. Miss Benedict, who, by the way, wants us both to call her Miss Alexei, seemed completely helpless for a while after the great day, and turned to Aunt Minerva for pretty nearly everything, principally advice. You can imagine how Aunt Minerva is enjoying herself. She just loves nothing better than managing other people's affairs for them, if they want her to. In the first place, Aunt Minerva advised her to get the house into livable condition, and find suitable servants, and get some modern clothes. And poor Miss Alexei acted like a lost kitten in going about it. Aunt Minerva just took hold and managed the whole thing. And you would never recognize our dilapidated old house of mystery now. It is so changed and so lovely. Miss Alexei has decided that now there is no further reason for her not to use their large fortune, and everything must be the nicest possible, for Cecily's sake. And Cecily, what a darling she is! Of course we are simply inseparable. She has even begun to go to the high school with me, because Miss Alexei and Aunt Minerva has decided that it will be better for her than studying with a private tutor. She is the happiest thing I ever saw, and says that she feels as if she were living in a fairy story all the time. We are just longing for the Easter vacation to come and your visit, and then we three can be together in the good old way. Won't it be glorious? But this is all aside from the other two big pieces of news I wanted to tell you. Almost from the beginning, Aunt Minerva has been urging Miss Alexei to go to a first-class oculist and have her eyes examined. And at last, a few weeks ago, they went together. And what do you suppose is the result? He said that almost without a doubt her sight can be restored with proper treatment and possibly a slight operation later. She began treatment at once and already her sight is much improved. She can stand a stronger light and has those awful headaches less frequently. You see, it was years since she had had any advice about them, and they've made great strides in treatment of the eyes since then. They can almost do the impossible. We are all so happy about it. And now for the last and biggest piece of news. Perhaps you are wondering what has become of Miss Alexei's mysterious and invisible older sister. And it is about her that I'm going to tell you. You will never in the world be able to guess what has happened. Aunt Minerva insisted, again Aunt Minerva, that Miss Alexei must have one of the big alienists, that's what they call specialists in mental diseases, I've learned, see Miss Cornelia, the sister, and perhaps he could tell whether anything could be done for her. It took a long time to persuade Miss Alexei that there was any use in doing this, but at last she consented. I think she has always been very sensitive about the poor sister's losing her mind, and she never wanted anyone to see her. Even after she had a number of servants in the house, she wouldn't let anyone wait on Miss Cornelia but herself. Well, the great doctor came and was there for hours and asked a terrific lot of questions all about everything that had happened for years and years. He learned one thing that interested him more than anything else, he said. Do you remember the last day of summer when we were there, sitting in the garden, and I played on my violin? How Miss Alexei came down in a great hurry and asked me to stop because it disturbed her sister? You may remember, too, that I was playing the Träumerei, had played it twice? Well, she told the doctor that when Miss Cornelia heard that, she acted very much excited, cried, and twisted her hands and tried to speak. She hasn't spoken an intelligible word since she had the stroke. Miss Alexei also told him how their favorite brother had played so much on the violin, particularly that same air. He said this was the most hopeful sign. It indicated that conditions were now such that there was a possibility of her reason and memory and even speech being restored, provided they could touch just the right note of association. After he had thought the matter over a long time, he decided to try an experiment, and he selected me, little insignificant me, to help. He had me come in and bring my violin and sit in the room with Miss Cornelia a little behind her, so she would not notice me particularly. Then he had Miss Alexia and Cecily also sit there in plain sight of her, just quietly sewing or reading and not paying any particular attention to anyone. He and Aunt Minerva stayed outside, watching through the partly open door. It was the first time I had ever seen Miss Cornelia except that time when the shutter blew open. And Janet, she is magnificent looking, entirely different from what I imagined. She is large and stately and imposing, with white hair like Miss Alexia's, piled under a lace cap, and great black eyes. She just sat there quietly knitting and took no notice of anyone. You would not have known that there was anything the matter with her, except that her face was almost expressionless, as if she wasn't thinking of anything at all. I can't describe it any other way. Well, there we sat, and at a given signal from the doctor outside the door, I was to begin, very, very quietly and softly, to play the Träumerei. You just can't imagine how nervous I was. So much depended on my doing just the right thing. My hands shook, and my knees shook, and my heart thumped, and I thought I should never be able to even hold the bow. It seemed an age before the doctor raised his hand as a signal, but when he did, I tucked the violin under my chin and fairly prayed that I shouldn't make a failure of my part anyway. And I played the Träumerei through the best I could, and nothing happened. Miss Cornelia went right on knitting and never noticed at all. Then the doctor made another signal, and I began it again. This time she laid down her knitting, closed her eyes, and leaned her head against the back of the chair. And when I'd finished for the second time, what do you suppose happened? She opened her eyes and looked over at Miss Alexia and spoke, for the first time in nearly 30 years. And this is what she said, as simply and quietly as though all those 30 years had never elapsed. "Sydney must have come in again. I hear him practicing." Miss Alexia was so startled that she looked ready to faint away, but she managed to say, "No, Cornelia, but I will tell you all about it." Then the doctor in great excitement beckoned all of us to come out of the room quickly and leave her alone with Miss Alexia. So we vanished, and the two were together a long, long time. At last Miss Alexia sent for Cecily, and she was gone a long time too. When it was all over, the doctor said it was the most successful thing that had ever happened in all of his experience. Miss Cornelia is completely restored to memory and speech. And after the first shock of learning all that had been blank to her for these past years, she rallied well, and is now resting and recuperating under the care of Miss Alexia and a trained nurse. She still finds it very hard to realize all the changes that have happened in those 30 years, and she grieves a great deal over the death of her brother, which seems very recent and terrible to her. But she is simply devoted to Cecily, and Cecily is growing almost as fond of her as she is of Miss Alexia. Next summer the whole family is going with us to spend 2 months in Northam, Aunt Minerva's doings again, because it is so lovely and restful there. And won't we have a wonderful summer together, Janet dear? I can hardly wait for the time to come. Well, that is all the news I have to tell, and I guess you'll agree with me that it is certainly enough, and very satisfying. One thing amuses me to pieces, Janet, every time I think of it. Do you remember how, when you first came to visit us last summer, I was explaining to you all I'd discovered about Benedict's Folly, and flattering myself with the idea that or rather you and I, would work out the puzzle and solve the mystery, all by ourselves? What little geese we were! A lot we did towards unraveling any of that tangle. Even Father and Major Goodrich were way off track. It took Aunt Minerva, the darling, to walk right in and clear the whole thing up. Here's hurrah, then, for Aunt Minerva. She certainly had the laugh on us. However, I sometimes console myself with the thought that it was we, you and I, who first took an interest in that shuttered old house in the garden. If we hadn't, who knows? We would probably never have met Cecily, and things would be just the same as ever there, and Miss Alexia wouldn't have. But what's the use of going into all that? The girl next door is our own dearest friend now, and everything is all right. I just looked out the window and saw a light in Cecily's room. She is also writing to you tonight. We promised each other we both would. I'm growing sleepy now, so good night and heaps of love. Marcia. February 28, 1913. P.S. Did I tell you this before, I wonder? Cecily has both bracelets now. Aunt Minerva, of course, insisted that she should. She has put them safely away and will never part with them again. But we take them out and look at them sometimes and think of all the strange and awful adventures they have been through and the curious chance that brought them together again. Always, after we've looked at them, Cecily asks me to play the Träumerei. And while I play, she sits very quietly and says nothing, and her eyes have a far-away look. But I know what she's thinking about. M. End of chapter 21, 6 months later. End of The Girl Next Door by Augusta Huiell Seaman.